Welcome to today's webinar on pricing the guest experience in the post-COVID world. We're super excited that all of you are here joining us. We've got some amazing attractions and panelists that are going to be talking with us today. So one of the first things I'd like to point out, if this is your first webinar with us, we will be asking for questions throughout the session today. And we'd like to invite you to please use the question and answer that you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So you can pose a question at any point during the webinar, and we will either potentially bring it up in the discussion with panelists, or we may respond to you directly in the WebEx. So you can use that at any point when you have a question. There may be some questions that we don't answer on the WebEx, and we'll cover those separately afterwards. But please feel free to use that. And with that, we're starting the pricing the guest experience in the post-COVID world. So I want to go through our agenda real quick so you'll have an idea of exactly what we're going to go through and what today's discussion is going to look like. So we're going to, we have this webinar set for about 90 minutes. And so we will wrap up at about 3:30 Eastern Daylight Time. And basically, this is going to be just a community discussion. We have, many attractions on the line, a lot of folks that support the attraction industry, and we've got a lot of experts that we've gathered together to talk about pricing, both from attractions as well as from the pricing industry. And the one thing we would like to ask is if we have any members of the press that are attending, if you'll just kind of maybe drop something in the Q&A to let us know that you're here. We'd also invite you, if you have any questions or if there's anything you'd like to use from the webinar afterwards, please just reach out to us or the panelists that you want to talk with, and we'd be happy to help you out as much as we can. And so today is our 8th webinar that started shortly after most attractions in the United States started closing. So we are focusing on pricing the guest experience. We have a couple other webinars still are slated and scheduled for the remainder of the month, so you'll see those there. Our next one is looking at what consumers are saying and digging into some of those industry surveys that have been conducted.
Hey everybody, this is Randy Jocelyn, and I'm your co-host with Matthew today. And if you've missed any of our webinars, they're available at www.gatewayticketing.com community if you want to catch up, or if you need to step away during this webinar. This webinar will be up and ready to go on Friday. I want to give a quick shout out to our team, specifically Vince, who does a great job getting these all edited for content on the website. That little QR code on the bottom right, you can snap a picture of it, and you can save that link. Matthew will be sending an update after the meeting today that will also include this link, and you can check back on Friday for a recording if you need it. So this is me, Randy. My job is at Gateway Ticketing is Wildlife and Conservation Principal. As I mentioned, I'm joined by my co-host here, Matthew Hohenstein, our Destinations Principal. We have two very awesome speakers. One of them has helped us out with some webinars previously, and the next one, David Casey, this is his first time joining us as a panelist on the webinar. He's got some really exciting news. David is the database system administrator at Utah's Hogle Zoo. He's got a great story to share about reopening, but I'll save that for a few minutes. Also joining us is Jared Vaughn, Senior Manager of Visitor Experience and Fun at the Cincinnati Zoo. He's going to outline some of his reopening pricing strategies for all of us to listen in on.
Also joining us from Integrated Insights is Scott Sanders. He's the president of Integrated Insights and has a wealth of experience in the attraction industry, leading the pricing organization at Disney Parks and Resorts and working with lots of attractions throughout the U.S. and the world with their pricing strategy. Also from Integrated Insights is Stephen Davis, one of their vice presidents that also has a wealth of experience in the industry in dealing with pricing. And an additional panelist representing Diginex is Greg Lowen, the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director for Diginex, where they focus on automated dynamic pricing in the attractions industry. So they'll be joining us for some discussion. to talk through the pricing questions that we've got. And as always, Bill D'Angelo is our excellent host in keeping us going and helping respond to those questions throughout the webinar. So with that, I want to jump into the industry update and talk a little bit about what we're seeing going on. So one of the things that recently happened is that we started to see large attractions in China reopening. One of those is the Forbidden City, which closed in January and after about 3 months reopened. We are seeing that there's very strict measures in place whenever they're reopening those. One of the strictest being the capacity management. So this is an attraction that generally can see 80,000 people in a single day. And when they reopened here last Friday, they limited it to just 5,000. So I happened to have been there last February, and the picture on the left is one I took of the entry. So if you think of it as the park entrance, and on the right is the entry on May 1st. I will tell you that February 23rd was not a special day in China. It was a normal visitation day, and it was wall-to-wall people. Now it's a very controlled experience. And actually, once you get inside the attraction, it's even a little bit starker how different it is with limited attendance. So the picture on the left, again, was when I was there in February, and the picture on the right was after they'd reopened. So it's a serious focus on ensuring that there's an ability for social distancing in an environment that was very much not used to it in the prior. And then additionally in China, we've just yesterday on the earnings call for Disney, they announced that they have a reopening date for Shanghai Disneyland Resort. This is following how after they had slowly reopened some of Disneytown for like shopping or for restaurants. And so, it's very good signs that we're starting to see some large attractions coming out of this. A couple of items that I found very interesting and took away as a learning experience was in trying to ensure that they're conveying a safe and a secure atmosphere. A lot of their messaging is actually focused from their chief medical officer and coming out from that level of expertise. Which I thought was interesting as we look at how do we make sure folks are reassured that these experiences are safe and how that we're doing due diligence. Certainly implementing a lot of the things that we've been talking about in prior discussions of social distancing, an increased focus on cleaning, and getting prepared for that reopening. One of the other items that recently came out, we had talked about some information that was provided by IAAPA for some of the Asian attractions. IAAPA as a general has now provided some reopening guidance. So it's a really lengthy document that kind of gives a lot of considerations and guidance for various items of interaction in an attraction. So you see on the right-hand side of the screen all those items listed out there that recommend you kind of reaching out to the IAAPA site and taking a look at that as you're considering your plans. And then Randy, I think that you've seen some stuff in California.
I want to share some information. This is actually really, really exciting, good update from the state of California. So like many states, and I'm really seeing this out of New York and California, they have a multi-phased approach. In California, it's a 4-stage approach, which I believe right now they're moving from 2 to 3. They're just kind of putting out the dates. Governor Newsom is doing that. But you can see here, connect.sandiego.org, it's really San Diego's Tourism Authority has worked together with Legoland, SeaWorld, San Diego Zoo, Safari Park, the Midway, some of our really good friends down in San Diego to come up with a plan, an action plan. So you can see here some of those screening protocols that they've put in place. I would really encourage everybody to check out what is happening in California, because many states that don't have a plan are going to look to New York and California for a strategy if they don't already have one specific to attractions reopening. We have heard in some other locales that some of the bigger attractions are being pushed into like a stage 4, which is possibly going to delay them a little bit in reopening. So I would highly suggest you talk to these folks, maybe talk to your local tourism authority to work on a strategy if you don't have one already. So that's some really good information out of San Diego. I love this, what some of the innovation that we're seeing, and I just wanted to bring it up. in Texas here. This is the San Antonio Zoo. One of the best logos. I love that logo, by the way, or anybody from the San Antonio Zoo on. They are doing a drive-through zoo, and this is not the only zoo that's doing this. I've definitely heard grumblings of many zoos that are exploring this as an option to keep the guests safe in their vehicles as they navigate around a planned path. Some of the places that are suggesting this or are talking about it are discussing pilot vehicles and how those vehicles could be used to kind of keep everybody at a nice pace, and then go online and basically register a vehicle, and you would just admit them like a person. So really great innovation that we're starting to see all around in terms of some of the zoos that many of us like to frequent. That's a really good example of rethinking your organization. I'm not going to talk too long about this, but a really great article from McKinsey.com. I'll send you the link in the email following, but I love this, rethinking the organization. This is a great time to rethink what are you going to do in light of reopening. And some of those discussions need to be around what are my guests thinking. We're really excited next week to be talking about the guest sentiment, because that's a really important conversation that you need to have. What are my guests thinking? Do they have enough money? What offerings do I have that support the amount of money that my guests are willing to spend for this experience? And we're going to have those conversations today. In fact, Matthew's going to share some information about sentiment right now, about pricing sentiment. So Matthew, why don't you go ahead and talk about this information?
Yeah, so this was a study that had come out of BVA, BDRC, and it was focused on the United States of America. And as we start talking about pricing, one of the things I think that obviously factors into that is how comfortable individuals feel in their financial situation. In this study, they'd done over 3 different waves, April 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th. And what is promising is that while, for a couple of weeks, people are really in that, a significant amount were in that uneasy state. I'm cautious. I've been hit very hard, about 62, 64%. There was a pretty marked change going into April 29th. So as a lot of those states and areas started to announce that, hey, I think we're going to be able to start reopening and lifting that, that's given a little bit of promise. So I think this obviously factors into someone's ability to use discretionary income to go to parks. So it's moving in the right direction. Then over in the United Kingdom, the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions had done a attractions recovery tracker. And the United Kingdom is probably a little bit more in the midst of their closure right now versus kind of starting to emerge from it. But one of the things that they have there obviously is a fair amount of maybe nonprofit or cultural attractions. And one of the questions they had posed to their respondents was, how do you think that pricing is going to be affected when we emerge out of this? And what was intriguing to me is that about 55% expected really no change in pricing. And then there was even 30% that thought, hey, you know what, I might pay a little bit more. And I think the survey thought that there might be a little bit of an altruistic feeling there, understanding that these cultural attractions were hit a little bit harder. And then 15% expected to pay a little less. And Stephen, I know when we were talking about this yesterday, you had mentioned that this is very interesting because normally this is a very tough question to ask. Did you want to share your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So we do a lot of research around pricing all over the world. We've asked tourists, what do you expect to pay? Do you expect to pay more or less? What are your barriers? And no matter what, you always have a segment who expect to pay less. And so when we saw this, and we saw it was 15% expecting to pay less, that was actually really promising for us because we always expect some cohort to say, nope, I'm paying too much already. So that the fact that there was 85% of this respondents saying that they expected to pay the same or more is actually really promising from our perspective.
That's great. Well, thank you. And I think with that, we'll kind of put a pin in our industry update and really move into our pricing discussion.
Awesome. Really excited to have this conversation. I wish I had the Tom Cruise show me the money picture to put up here because obviously, ultimately, this is an area where we all are very interested in gathering some information. Now, I want to let you all know that this is also a really difficult conversation. It's really difficult to have a webinar where we can have the community share pricing information, because although we are all in it together as we begin to reopen, and we're working on best ideas, and we're gathering best thoughts, when it comes to pricing, there's going to be obviously a lot of sensitivity. So I want to preface this by saying today you're going to hear different opinions. You're going to hear people that might say lower the price. You're going to hear people that say raise the price, dynamic pricing, seasonal pricing. We're going to hear a lot of different conversations. We're also focusing with zoos, and we are cognizant that we are talking specifically with two panelists from zoos, but it's important to kind of think about how zoos are. They're obviously the first to reopen right now because of the open air concept. They are in a unique position to kind of be the front runners in our industry as they reopen many attractions. But they're also a huge juggernaut in the attractions community. We have Bronx Zoo with over 4 million visitors annually at all of its properties. WCS, I should have said, 1.8, almost 2 million at Bronx Zoo itself. Cincinnati Zoo, close to that as well, 1.8. Hogle Zoo, who Dave's on, 1.2 million. So these are obviously very popular attractions, and so we could still get a lot of good guidance from them. We would love as many questions as possible. We got a great team of panelists that's going to also help us out, because Integrated Insights and Diginex both work in the for-profit attraction space as well, doing pricing studies, and so they're great resources to help us out as well. Last week we asked you questions about, hey, what are you going to be doing? And actually, this is some data from a couple of weeks, and we shared all these questions with a number of our panelists. And I love them. Are other attractions offering discounts? Should I raise prices? What do you do when you have online discounts, when you have AAA and you use SNAP or EBT? We have a huge list of questions, which we will probably put up on the community. And these are all questions that you have, and we're going to do our best to answer those. But what's really, really interesting is that you as a community, you've already kind of dialed in what your strategy is going to be. So during this time period, over 66% of you feel comfortable with your pricing strategy. So a lot of those questions that I just showed, I believe most of us have already kind of gathered some information on. So this is a great opportunity for that 66% maybe to share with us what those strategies are. And if you're in that 34%, this is a good time to gather more information. So we definitely welcome your questions. I'm going to turn it over to David. David, you and I have been friends for a long time, and really exciting news. In fact, this one totally surprised me, David, because I wasn't aware that you were reopening, and then all of a sudden you reopened on May 2nd. I mean, you just reopened, and do you mind sharing a little bit about your reopening strategy and how this went down?
Yeah, sure. Not a problem. It was actually kind of a surprise to us, too. We got the go-ahead from the county. We did have plans in place, but, at that point, it was, all hands on deck. We got to hit the ground running on this one. So we started mapping out our entry plaza, our ticketing booth and all that. We had to totally redesign that.
Now, this is I just changed the slide. This is not this weekend. This is what you look like on a not so busy regular day. Is that right?
Yep, that's an average day right there. And so that's our ticket booth. And as you see right there, it'd be really hard to queue using social distancing in that area right there, because that's taken from the street. The street is like right at the end of that picture. So we had to move our queue lines to our private entrance that runs through our pavilion. And by doing that, we have a much larger space. There's picnic tables in there that we actually use as a divider, because they're about, a little over 5 feet wide. And it, makes the queue move a little slower, but you're able to distance a lot better in there.
Here, I'll jump ahead. I think I actually have a picture or two of that. Let me jump ahead here. That's the pavilion. So you're queuing people. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you're queuing people through this area right at the top center of your screen, that pathway. Is that right?
Exactly, yes. And then they're moving through that pavilion and coming out into the main entry plaza.
I was going to try to zoom in on one of these pictures if I can. So there's your visitor entrance. Actually, that's guiding people over.
Correct.
Oh, this is some interesting data too. So you guys, do you mind sharing a little bit of that information right there about how many people you were expecting to have per day?
Yeah, no problem. So we needed to implement a time ticket and online only purchase option for both members and our GA guests. Members normally would just walk up, show their membership, and come in. But since we were limiting our entry to 200 guests per half an hour, that equals out to about 3,000 per day. The reason we were doing that is we wanted to, with the dwell time in that, we wanted to stay around, 800 to 1,000 people in the park at a time. And this would let us do that, hopefully. That's what we were hoping. So with that 200 time ticketing an hour, it really helped in that aspect.
And then,
so, go ahead.
Oh, and this is that slide that of your pavilion as you were bringing people in through the attraction. I mean, into your main entrance.
Correct. Yep. And we actually have two queue lines in there. It's kind of hard to see. One for the current hour or half hour, and one for the half hour coming up. So we're able to queue 2 times at the same time. So,
okay. Yeah, go ahead, Stephen. We have a couple of questions I want to get to too. Stephen, jump on in there.
Oh, I didn't. No, it's good right now. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Steve. That's my bad. I thought someone was jumping on a question here. That's great. Hey, so let me ask you, David. We have a couple of questions. How large is your zoo property?
It's right around 43 usable acres.
Okay. And one of our attendees had a question about this 40 guests, 60%. What is exactly that daily guests mean? Is that is 40% your member base, or what?
This slide was made by someone else, and I'm really not sure what that means. So, but basically, we have about 40% of our attendance per day is our members. So we wanted to set aside 200 or 40% of that 200 tickets for the members to buy, and then have the rest for the general admission people. Because what we're seeing, what we notice, the membership tickets are selling out almost every day right now, and the GA are not. So members are coming up, but with our time ticketing approach, we can actually move bucket to bucket. So we can take some of the GA movement to members if we're seeing not a whole lot of GAs being purchased, and we need to open up some of those spots to members. So it's really nice to be able to control it like that.
Well, that's really cool. We have another question. I think maybe it's an observation. I think one of your slides down here talks about in the morning, your observations were that 9 out of 10 people were wearing masks, and kind of toward the later half of the day, it seemed that maybe that was half. The question was, did it warm up in the day? Do you think that maybe the heat has something to do with the people less compliant? It doesn't say that they have to wear masks.
Right. It was a beautiful day. I mean, it was perfect weather, so that could be it. There's also, when we first opened up, we released that masks were required. We got and that was from the county, actually. The county was going to require that. We got a lot of pushback on that on all of our social media channels, and the county actually reduced that like a few hours in after they announced it. So then we changed our policy to match the counties, which is highly recommended. So, I mean, through these last few days, it's a little over 50%, I would say, are wearing masks, probably 75, and we do sell the masks on site as well. So that's nice.
Oh, that's great. Wow, we're getting all kinds of great questions. So I'll let you keep talking, and then we'll try to button up answers. I do like this. It says here that everybody has to print their tickets at home. So did you completely close your ticket booths down altogether?
Yep, our ticket booths are closed. We do have a guest service window that is open. If people walk up and we do have tickets available, we will sell them tickets at that one window. But most people do purchase them online. We sent an email out to all of our members saying, hey, we're opening them back up. Here's how you do it now, because they're not used to reserving tickets. The tickets are free for the members. They just have to reserve that time spot. And then when they come up, this is our improvised scanning podium now. They scan their own membership. They scan their own tickets. So it's pretty much no contact.
It does look like it looks like you have a plexiglass screen up there to protect your employee from the guests there, right?
Correct. Yep.
Oh, cool. I was so impressed with how quickly you put all this together. I think you had told me you just had a couple days, and not only that, I had asked David to share a little bit. And Dave, I know you and your team put together this guide. I think it's like 50 or 60 slides with some follow-up and action items. And David has offered, if anyone's interested in reading this, just please email him, and he will make available to you this big PDF document, and maybe you could have more conversations with him about reopening.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
And actually, the director of the zoo, Steve Burns, actually put that together, and he did a great job. It's pretty
great.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, it's fascinating to read, and it's really topical. I mean, you just opened. Any big action, big learnings that you want to share with anybody that you didn't cover already? I mean, I'm sure we're going to cover more.
Oh yeah. Well, one important thing is you have to be flexible. Like any pricing structure that you have, any policy you put in place, you really have to be able to change that on the fly, because we made so many changes, while we were setting this up. Like, this is not going to work. We can't do this. And actually on Friday, we had like a little test with some board members and stuff like that came through to make sure everything was going to be working when we opened on Saturday. So that was also helpful to have like a kind of dry run.
Great. I think it looks like, Matthew, do you have some questions that are ready? It looks like we have quite a bit of questions for David.
There's a few.
David, we're going to put you on the spot here.
Yeah. So David, the 3,000 limitation that you're doing per day, how many, is that what percentage of your normal attendance would that be? Like, is that a severe reduction, or is it kind of just a minimal?
For a busy day, like say we would have a busy weekend, it's about 30%.
Okay. That's great. And then with the masks that you're selling, do you know kind of roughly the price of what those are going for?
Yeah, they're $9.99 and like $7.99 for youth sizes.
Okay, so you're doing two different sizes, and that's great.
Yeah, we actually have adult, youth, and toddler. So we have three different sizes.
Got it. And then whenever you kind of thought about that 3,000 limit, and I think you mentioned about, how did you come up with that? Well, what was your guidance? Were you looking towards the governmental agencies, or was that something that you derived out a different way?
Yeah, mostly the county, and that we figured out our square footage and how many people we could have per square foot with social distancing rules and stuff like that. And that number we felt comfortable with. And that number with the 200, per half an hour, it gives, with our dwell time, it gives a good turnover. So we stay right around that, 800 to 1,000.
And then are you doing any temperature checking as well?
We are not, no.
Okay. That's great. I think that's many of our questions. I think that there's going to be a chance that we're going to have a few more that we didn't get to. But David, most likely what we'll do is just follow up with you after or towards the end of the webinar, and then we'll make sure that we include those in kind of the notes that we send out following this.
Fantastic.
So thanks. So Randy,
I want to talk about pricing with David.
Yeah.
Actually, David. So tell me about pricing. What was your pricing strategy? I mean, you had to reopen very quickly. So I have two questions. Number one, were you ready with a pricing strategy before you were told you would reopen? And number two, what was your opening pricing?
Our opening pricing was the same as it was going to be no matter what. So we have seasonal pricing, we have a high season and a low season pricing. And right now we're in our high season. And so we just kept our pricing the way it was going to be and for that time period.
So I'd imagine when the teams got together to discuss pricing, was that was that a unanimous decision? Was there a sub? I'm just curious. I mean, there have to have been people saying, I think we need a discount, or let's raise prices. Really, ultimately, how did you kind of get to that position?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't in on all of the discussions, but generally, it's easier to lower a price or discount a price if needed, if you're seeing, that is something you need to do, than raise the pricing. Because it's taken us, a few years in that to actually get to the level that we're at now, because you just can't raise the price all at once. You kind of have to do it incrementally over, a couple of years. So, and we're comfortable with the level that it's at right now. So, but if you need to change it, you can always throw a promotion out there, discount, something like that.
And are you, do you guys have, I mean, do you feel that there's a need to do that? I mean, based on how you opened, are you feeling pretty comfortable that you're not even going to need to reach into that little promotion and waiting?
That's something that has not yet been discussed. I think we want to give it, at least a week or 2 weeks to see what's going to happen, both with the county and, with how we're doing.
Yeah. Actually, I'm gonna tee this up for later because I want to ask both our pricing panelists down the road. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about maybe that fear of discounting, that fear of dropping that or lowering that price too soon. So when we do get an opportunity, I think that the community is really going to want to know is like, how long do you sit in and hold on tight, and really how long do you have to wait to measure if that is the right price? So when I come back to you guys, I wanna mention that, but I do want to pivot over to Jared. Jared, at the Cincinnati Zoo, you just heard from Dave. Do you guys mind sharing your pricing strategy for us when you reopen?
Sure. Thanks, Randy. So we are more focused on looking at what the experience looks like now. Obviously, as everyone's gone through a lot of bleeding during this time with, vastly reduced revenue and being closed, we are really trying to look for what that experience looks like, and the community's been hurting too. So that's the other side of it that we're looking at. So we're looking at doing maybe a lesser admission price, as a number of buildings will probably be closed from the start. The zoo's going to look different for people that are coming in. So I think we're really focused on pricing it from that and then going up as time goes along. We're not set on a price yet. We're still talking through those things, but that's what feels right to all of us, is the community has really been there for us through all of this, with supporting us in a number of ways in our emergency operating fund. So we want to make sure that we're there for the community too, and understanding that a number of them are hurting, and pricing that experience to make sure that we're still delivering on the best visitor experience in the nation.
And you had said, I love some of these images about your call to actions, with all your beverage products, your shirts, your online store. It seems like you're continuing to really push people to your website to engage with you.
We've got a lot of creative folks on our team, figuring out different ways to be able to generate revenue, whether it be masks with our partnership with Service Systems Associates. They have sold over almost 18,000 masks from our website, which is amazing, both for adults and youth sizes. We've been doing Facebook home safaris every day where we're able to ask folks to donate, and we've seen over $200,000 in donations from there. We partner with local businesses to sell shirts, as we do frequently, even with Fiona. The Support the Zoo shirts have raised over $30,000. We're doing cameos where you can have our director do a little cameo to you or get a cameo from Fiona, and those have raised over $20,000.
Does she show up in a Zoom meeting, or how does this work?
So that's something new that we actually just launched that's super creative. We were looking for a way to still be able to do our behind the scenes experiences. So we're calling them Cincinnati Zoom calls. And we have a number of animals that you can actually have come in for 15 minutes and join your go-to meeting or your Skype meeting or your Zoom meeting. Just to kind of, everyone's telecommuting and meetings look different now. So the opportunity to have an animal join in and make that, liven it up a little bit is something that we're definitely taking advantage of. And we're seeing those sales come in from all over the country. People are taking advantage of those. So that's really exciting.
I keep looking at our participant list to see if she's going to pop in here, maybe next week or something. That is a really great idea. Zoom calls. That's great. You guys are really thinking out of the box. I really think that's great.
Well, and I think along those lines as well, when we are discounting admission when we first open, we can look to some of these things to stay in place, to kind of supplement that revenue that we're maybe missing. So using that creativity as well helps us along when we're in this different new normal.
I'm going to pause because I want to make sure that we're talking a little bit about pricing, because you do feel that the sentiment right now is you're generating revenue in these areas, but that the plan is probably going to be to slightly lower some of your prices upon reopening. Was that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
Just for admission is really what we're looking at right now. Membership would stay the same because that's an annual pass. We're not, I can't really speak to any of the pricing that we're looking to adjust on the inside of the zoo, but for admission, we're really looking at what's the experience when you come in when you're at the zoo, and looking at what our average price is versus what our lower price is. And I can say we're huge supporters of dynamic pricing. We started that a year ago, last November, and have seen over $1 million impact in the past year just from dynamic pricing. And we did that twofold. Obviously, most attractions will use something like dynamic pricing to help generate some more revenue, but really for us too, we're huge on creating the best visitor experience in the nation. And we really want to make sure that we are pricing that admission ticket for the experience that folks are getting when they're coming through our gates. So if it's a rainy day or if it's kind of the shoulder season, we're not going to have that peak pricing where that demand is there. Diginex has been a great partner to us to help us through that process to kind of figure out what that looks like for our visitors to make sure that we're pricing it accordingly. And there's a perfect example as well of what that looks like. So you can see all that pricing kind of does look the same, except when you're looking at weekends, we're hoping that things are going to get back to normal or a little bit closer to normal by September. So we do have those tickets available right now in case if people want to plan in advance to be able to purchase that admission then.
Well, that's great. I think I'd love to pivot for a second and talk about dynamic pricing. I'm going to pass it over to Greg for a second. So, Greg, for those of us on the call that maybe aren't really familiar with what dynamic pricing is, do you mind just giving us, a 30-second or 1 minute kind of overview of dynamic pricing?
Sure. The concept of dynamic pricing is to give yourself the flexibility of working with more than one price point under different conditions and over time. So we see a lot of the industry really are using a static pricing strategy. They have a single admission price, or possibly they have two. They have a peak season and an off-peak season price. We work with a lot of our clients at the top of this pyramid where we use a lot of data. We build a customized piece of software that uses inputs from the Galaxy ticketing system, but also external sources like weather forecasts and things like that to determine the optimal admission price for each day of the year. And then we reevaluate those prices normally on a daily cycle so that we're constantly using the latest and best information to determine what the right price is for each day as we get more information over time. The point I'll make though on today's call is that there's as we try and show in this pyramid here, there's a big gap between the industry's static pricing strategy and our particular methodology, which we place at the top of the pyramid. And the more you can, even if you don't want to work with a third party, the more you can relax the constraint that you impose on yourself on the number of price points. Generally speaking, the better the results you'll get. And pricing, dynamic pricing, of course, can have a huge impact on revenue, but it's not just about revenue. It has a major impact on consumer behavior. So the likelihood of a guest upgrading to a membership, the willingness of a guest to voluntarily come during an off-peak period of time, the voluntary willingness of a visitor to purchase their ticket further in advance or to buy that ticket online so that it's a contactless transaction, which is a key theme we hear from a lot of our clients right now. Your pricing strategy and how you apply different prices to different products and different channels can really drive behavior in a way that's favorable to some of the reopening objectives that we hear our clients talking about.
And Greg, right now, so we did a poll earlier, and right now about 73% of the folks that responded to that poll kind of shared that they're just doing general pricing. About 15% are doing date-specific pricing, and about 12% were kind of seasonally pricing. The one thing I think that I was looking at this as it's a potential opportunity for some of those attractions that might have historically been scared of pricing differently, because many of the attractions are starting to change the experience, right? Because we might need to limit the capacity, we may need to do these other things. We're having to have a little bit more in-depth conversation with our customers when we're selling, because we're having to say, okay, hey, what date are you going to come? Because I need to make sure there's capacity. So do you think that that's a tool that as attractions are looking to do that may be able to leverage pricing changes at the same time?
Absolutely, it's a great point, and we've actually been receiving some calls from folks who aren't currently clients during this downturn, asking us exactly that question. If you're already making changes in your processes such that you're asking your guests to buy in advance through your online channel because you want a contactless transaction and you want to manage to a specific capacity constraint, and you're already requiring them to pick a day and pick a time in which they want to buy their ticket for, the concept of then trying to apply a unique price to a given day, or even further, each of the time periods within a given day, it's really only a half step further. And so if you've gone, if as part of your reopening strategy, you're thinking about things like date-specific tickets or time-based ticketing to try and manage your capacities, dynamic pricing is actually a pretty easy layover on top of that, and can really accelerate the turbocharge the impact of those changes.
That's great.
Yeah, and actually, I want to switch gears then for a little bit, because Jared, thank you for that information about how you guys are leveraging dynamic pricing, and I'm of course curious how quickly we can ramp up. And it seems like you need to have these time slots available, but because I'm looking at this slide here, because 73% of the community that's on this webinar is not using dynamic pricing today, or even seasonal pricing or date-specific pricing. I want to ask the team from Integrated Insights, like what do you do right now if you don't even have metrics involved with having capacities? What is your advice to everybody on the call? That's that 34% that doesn't know what to do next. What is your advice?
Yeah, so I think our advice is always to lead with the consumer. So we think that pricing is much more than just a binary decision to increase or lower price. We take a very holistic view at price, and we think that starts with the consumer. So understanding what are the motivators, what are the barriers for people right now. I think right now a key barrier is the people that want to feel safe, right? So if they can see the steps that you're taking to make their families feel safe, I think a key motivator for people right now is to get out. Families want to get out. I do think that there is a little bit of pent-up demand. And so as you think about those two things and, okay, what is really driving people's decisions, right? And Jared talked about this a little bit, and really what he talked about was, the price value, right? You don't necessarily even want your consumers focused on your price point specifically. You want them focused on your value proposition. And so our recommendation to people is think about your consumer. How's your consumer thinking right now? And if price is not necessarily the issue around how they're deciding to go, right? If it's more about, I want to get out of the house, do I feel safe going there? then really we're telling people resist that temptation to initially lower price, right? It's particularly making structural price changes that are going to be difficult to unwind in the future. And so that's been our guidance, and really to think about it holistically. You know, hold for now. If you feel like you need to implement promotions and discounts, certainly do that. We encourage people, this slide that you're showing right now, these are kind of our 3 key strategies as we see them. And that last one there around holistic pricing, that have shelf-ready promotions, right? So build that arsenal of promotions that you feel like you may need, but don't necessarily come out of the gate with the firepower, right? So that's really our perspective. Scott, is there something you'd like to add to that?
Well, I think I'll just build on it by saying that, you know, price stratification that Greg talked about, product stratification are really powerful levers, right? Yeah, as you think about what you have. So you want to inventory all of your core assets, right? I think about not only the 70% that are just holding on a static price point, and then the 34% that aren't. But how do you take all your assets and begin to leverage them to protect and grow your revenue, right, by understanding consumer behavior? So to reinforce Stephen's point, keep the consumer front and center, but then package, bundle your product, right, to optimize revenue and ultimately profitability with those that are going to be willing to come during this time period. I think I just want to reinforce the other thing that you said, Stephen, about you don't want to make any rash decisions now in this process that you're not going to be able to unwind in the long term. I keep hearing a lot of dialogue around the new normal. Well, we are in a new normal, but none of our clients today are looking at, they're looking at, hey, it may take me several years to get back to the types of volumes that I was seeing, but they're all looking at like they're going to. So,
Scott, that's a really good point. We actually had someone in the Q&A share. This was Roxanne. She shared that on a webinar last week. It was a tourism industry webinar that during SARS many years ago, this hotel resort drastically cut their prices, and they didn't reclaim back to their previous rack rate for 7 years.
Yeah.
And I think that's to say, just, hold on tight a little bit. And this, obviously there's different approaches here, but that's really to say, just wait a little bit and make sure that you need to do that to create the demand, right?
Well, I think you want to, understand capacity, right? I think I'm hearing a lot of, people are cutting capacity, today, right? Because of this new norm. So you want to align demand, and I think, Stephen, it goes back to the slide that you were showing, right? So you want to understand where that demand is likely going to come from, whether it's the geographic segments that are going to be most likely to return first, demographic segments. Well, I heard a lot about pass holders and memberships and the capacity that they are taking up. So I think in most instances, right, if your demand exceeds capacity, there's no reason to lower price, right? If your demand isn't to capacity, right, then there may be opportunities. But I can tell you, in my experience, pricing, price, often isn't the primary consideration, in the purchase decision, right? I think a lot of it comes around, the quality of the product, the service you're delivering. So, Jaron, you were talking about value, right? I think you try to align your value proposition, with your pricing. I think trust, the reputation of the brand, all come into play. But in my experience, lowering price, in most cases, it's been very difficult to actually incent enough incremental demand to recoup the dilution risk. Yeah. So, but you have promotions and have them on the shelf and ready to go, right? And the only thing you have to do then is drop in whatever level of a discounting that you need to actually take and drive the level of demand you need.
Scott, one of the things Scott just said, I think, is really important, that just lowering price a lot of times is not enough to incent demand, right? Especially if you're just dropping the price, particularly if you're dropping it at the gate. We find once people make it to the gate, they're there and they're willing to pay. Dropping price at the gate, not going to increase any demand. What can drive demand are messaged promotions that have strong calls to action, are tightly fenced and targeted at specific segments. We find that those are much more successful at driving incremental demand than just a structural price decrease, because a lot of times once people are in that process of purchasing, whether that's online or at the gate, they're pretty well through the idea that they want to do this is the experience they want. And so that little bit of a delta in the price, not always enough to move them in the direction.
Yeah, you brought something up about, what happens when you arrive. And actually, I want to send it back to Greg and Jared for a moment. I got this press release yesterday from Natural Bridge Caverns. They're great friends. Brian Avotter, their cavern geologist and system administrator. He wears two hats at the caverns. He was on a webinar for us a few weeks ago, and they announced that they're reopening. And Greg, I think you assist them with price points. What is the pricing strategy for them, because they are reopening? What do you take into consideration? And if somebody does purchase a ticket that day, is it the highest price, or how are you guys managing that with them as partners?
Yeah, well, so they are a client of ours. They have a dynamic pricing strategy, so the price will differ based on the day of admission that a visitor chooses. We did go through a process of reevaluating all of their daily prices prior to reopening, looking at a variety of factors. I agree with what Stephen and Scott said, that we noticed there's often a reflexive desire to discount, largely assuming that will be necessary to get people to help overcome their fear of coming out of the house again. But I think Scott made this point as well. That's also overlaid with a pretty significant reduction in capacity. In the case of Natural Bridge Caverns, the experience is going to be every bit as good as it always has. They do guided time-based tours, so they're already on a time-based ticketing system. And in a world where other substitute activities, even the ability to go to a restaurant, to go to a concert, to go to a live sporting event, other things people might do to get to activate their pent-up demand to do something outside of the house, those options still aren't available. We in this case think that on most days, the net balance is going to lead to a net increase in demand relative to the reduced capacity. So from day to day, the numbers are a little bit different, but on average, I think the prices, if anything, ticked up a little bit for Natural Bridge Caverns as we reevaluated their prices prior to reopening.
And I like that idea, that pent-up demand, because obviously in a conversation we had all together previously, it was one of the key pillars in moving forward is to create demand, right? And I think obviously reopening creates that surge. The Natural Bridge has some really interesting information. We'll send that link. They have a very specific COVID kind of action plan that if you're looking for options as you reopen, definitely look there. And it made me think a little bit, Jared, we've been getting some questions, and actually this is for Jared and for David. One of the things I'm reading here is, that some of their experiences are all going to be closed. The restaurants are going to be closed. It's really that you're really going to be able to go through and experience the caverns. Is that what you guys are doing? I'm seeing somebody asking about how do you price that when you have a lot less of the experience open?
Well, and I think that's where we're coming from. So I think everybody else makes some great points. We are not looking to discount our admission by any stretch because we think that we need to be able to increase that demand. We are fully expecting that the demand is going to be there. It is chiefly because of the experience that we're putting out. Anticipating that we're going to have a number of things closed, it may very well be that we have all animal buildings closed to start off with. We haven't determined that yet, but that experience is vastly different when you have a number of animal buildings or experiences that won't be open. We are very well known for our animal encounters that you have, the random encounters that you have in the park with staff members holding animals. Those are likely going to look very different when we reopen. So as we go along, that's what we're looking at is, the experience needs to match where the price is, especially if, looking back last year and people are used to coming to the zoo a couple times a year, so they're not going to buy a pass. If they're paying the same amount and that experience looks vastly different than the last time around, what are they going to think the next time that they want to come to the zoo? That would leave a sour taste in my mouth. So I think that's kind of where our logic is.
I think Jared's spot on there in terms of it's aligning the value proposition, right? So certainly if you are going to reduce your experience and it's changing greatly, you're thinking a little bit differently about pricing. So when we're talking about maintaining and this, demand exceeding capacity, we're assuming it's in that same world where experience may actually be better now because of less crowding. But if you are changing your experience, like Jared's taught, absolutely, you need to make sure that that price point aligns with the value that you're providing.
Yeah. I think there's another point as well, which is it's really important almost as a first step before you try and figure out what's the right price. You have to be very clear on what your objectives are in the short term. So oftentimes, pricing decisions are made through a lens of, well, what will generate the most revenue? But, it may be the case that for a short period of time after reopening, and I heard, this is the theme that Jared was mentioning, you say it's just really important that we reconnect with the community, and we want to get as many people through the gates as we can safely do so to get folks used to the idea that they can come back to the zoo. And we're willing to leave a little bit of money on the table in the short term to accomplish that objective. It's not about maximizing dollars necessarily. It's about meeting a different constellation of goals for some period of time, and that can lead you to very different correct answers for what the right price is.
Right, and we've seen at our venue, we have a train and carousel. We're not running that. We have a few indoor exhibits or small animal building. Those are currently closed. So the experience has changed. We're also one directional now, which helps with flow a lot. But, monitoring our social media and the feedback has been wonderful. Like, just because they're not crowded and you can sit and enjoy the animals, a lot better than on a 10,000 person day. So, but our feedback has been pretty good, and we are staging our opening. So, when we get the go ahead or we move into stage 2, then that's when we will, start opening the train and carousel, because those are, very high touch points. And so we're looking at how we're going to be opening up those sorts of features.
That's great, David. One of the things that we kind of also polled the audience for, and Stephen, I'd like to start with you and maybe get your thoughts on it, is membership or pass holders obviously is a critical component to any attractions visitation typically. And when we start thinking about that we have lower capacities and we're going to have to limit the amount of folks that are coming into our venue to maintain certain standards, how do you balance that membership group? There was about 58% of the folks on the call said that right now that makes up to potentially 24% of their normal attendance is membership. So we've got half of the group that there's even a larger amount of their attendance that's normally membership. And so I was wondering what your thoughts were on how do you secure that, but also there's this need to drive revenue and getting kind of general admission tickets in as well. What are your thoughts on balancing that?
Yeah, so I think you're speaking to one of what we would consider our principal guidelines, which was reward your most loyal customers. And a lot of the experiences I know on the call today, particularly when it comes to zoos, aquariums, that type of thing, do rely heavily on memberships. Regional theme parks often have very large pass holder bases. So it's going to be important to be able to maintain those, because as you think about your future years and who's going to be coming back, right, it's going to be important to maintain that in future years. Certainly, as you think about how your demand's going to pace in, it will be those pass holders that are going to likely be coming back first. Some of the things that we've been thinking around that could be great ways to manage this is, one, when you get ready for that opening and you think, okay, I think I'm ready to do this, do a soft launch and allow just your pass holders to come, right? Give them some goodwill. Hey, you guys are the first in the gate. We want you to get through this experience first. So that initially gets them in, gets them out of the house, and gets them doing something before you're actually open, right? Which can maybe take a little bit of pressure off. You can always leverage blockout dates if needed. And another thing we thought about too is, could you move some of that behavior by allowing incremental membership or pass holder discounts? So Tuesday through Thursday afternoons, do all of a sudden you increase that food and beverage retail discount by 10 points, right, to try to incent them to come in the middle of the week, or at least give them some goodwill because you've blocked them out of the weekend, right? So it's certainly going to be a balancing act, but it is really important, particularly for experiences that rely heavily on that pass holder base, to be able to maintain that and not discourage them or give them any bad taste in their mouth that's going to keep them from renewing future years.
Yeah. One thing we're seeing with a lot of our clients that are getting close to reopening, and so they're making some of these decisions. I think exactly what Steven said. First of all, many of them are planning to open with several days set aside strictly for members. Some of them are also considering community days where they're opening their attraction to first responders and others in the community that they want to honor in particular. But then beyond that, they are where they have strict capacity constraints. They are many of them are, I'd say most of them are forcing their members to do something they haven't had to do before, which is to actually book a time in advance, since they do have to maintain strict control over that capacity. But they are setting aside a certain portion of the capacity available in each hour or day or time period strictly for members. Whether that's a quarter or a third, depends on their unique business circumstances and what membership represents as a portion of their attendance and so forth. But they're making sure that there is that allocation that's available for their members at all times when they'd like to come.
I see. So one of the things that typically I would think of maybe as a knee-jerk reaction would be is, hey, we've been bleeding, we've been missing out on revenue, and so I really need to focus on whatever just brings cash in, and that probably could, as y'all have demonstrated, really not be good for the long term. It might help in the first couple of days, but it's really something that from a brand standpoint and would be detrimental. And so kind of making sure we focus and we balance and reward those that have been most loyal to us and have been supportive while we were closed is important. That's great feedback.
Matthew, I just want to jump in really quick because we did have a question from Helen about peaks and valleys, and Steven kind of addressed that. And it was really about how do you discount during the midweek. And this also went very closely with a question about how is the Hogle Zoom meeting the expectations. So Dave, you had mentioned that your projections, you're about at 80% of your attendance projection on weekends. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, of this our opening weekend, we hit about 80% on both days. So. And
then you're rolling down a little bit so far in the last couple of days. You've been able to measure around 50% of your projections for weekdays.
Correct.
So then that's where that knee-jerk reaction comes in. Obviously, of course, you can lower the price and bring more people in, but I think what you're considering doing is just saying, hey, it's a premier experience, and maybe target your membership base to say, come on the weekdays, we have more space, more time, and it's more, it's more like I was going to say it's just a more comfortable, open concept kind of enjoyment of the zoo. Is that kind of what the direction is right now?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, during the weeks and even the weekends, we're monitoring our time, seeing, if the member tickets sell out, what is it looking like with the GA? Can we move some over? And so that's what we've been doing to try to get more members, because in general, the member tickets are selling out.
So David, how are you communicating the things that you're doing to make your customer base or guests feel safe, right? Because ultimately you've been open now just a few days, right? And so word of mouth's powerful, right? And so as you think about 80% on weekends and 50% on weekdays, And then going into the summer period, it seems like you guys will hit that pretty quickly. But if I still come back to right now, I think people are wanting to know that you're building trust, building confidence that the things that you're doing right are going to keep them and their family safe. So have you guys spent a lot of time talking about that or executing against that?
We've had some media up here, of course, because we were one of the bigger organizations to open up when we got the go-ahead. We do Facebook Live feeds all the time. Especially yesterday was a good thing for Giving Tuesday. We had an all-day event for that on Facebook Live. So through those venues, people can see, what steps we are taking to make people feel safe. So
that's great. One of the things, kind of taking a step into another category of revenue, but something I think that's front of mind. Randy had mentioned a little bit of when he was talking about Natural Bridge Caverns of maybe having a little bit different of an offering, maybe not having food and beverage or having to make decisions like that. Scott, when we were talking a little bit ago, one of the things I think that you were thinking is how do you solve those problems in different ways, right? Like in food service, it's we might think that we can't open it right away because of the high contact, or it's just going to be a problem and we haven't solved for yet. But how do you what are other ways that you can think of to secure that revenue or to look at that differently?
Well, just using your food and beverage example, right? And assuming that the venues are set up to support it, right? I mean, you could sell, box lunches, with a ticket product, pre-arrival. So it's not the traditional, right? Where you have to have people, they pick up your product, right? I think, though, too, just to build off of the not opening components, but more even focus on the opening aspect. So what other things do you have, right, that you can package to add value? One thing, that I wanted to make sure that the group heard, because it's been brought up several times by all of us, is, the value proposition, right? And so, to me, for everybody out that's thinking about pricing, I would say focus on really understanding your value proposition and how you communicate that, right? If you can communicate the value proposition, it gives you a lot more leverage with price, right? So to protect your pricing through these times, look at product stratification, right? So all the assets that you have to sell, whether or not it's food and beverage or merchandise or these other experiences, VIP experiences, right? And try to put those together in a meaningful way that adds value. It goes back to understanding your consumer, how they consume your product, use your product, right? To be able to do that. So lead with the consumer, know what they want, desire, and need, and then package that. I'll use this example just very quickly at Disney when we did, the Magic Your Way pricing strategy, right? We were selling, 4, 5, and 6 day tickets for $3 for each incremental day, right? We were able to do that, right? To get people to buy into that longer stay. It was a no-brainer commitment, but we weren't diluting the base business, right? We had 4 parks, people were buying 4 day tickets. So leverage your assets in that capacity. But I'm hearing a lot of great dialogue today from the team about they're thinking out of the box, right, on how they're generating revenue or incremental revenues.
Certainly. So I think we've gotten a flood of questions that have been coming in. So I want to just jump back and go back a little bit. So this is not going to be a perfect segue. I'm not a Randy Jocelyn, but I wanted to address some other questions that had come up. So Jared, if I could put you on the spot for a moment, you had mentioned that we may be looking to reduce the price because maybe our offering is going to be a little bit less, and we also want to be respectful for the community of what they've done as we've gone through this. Are you going to also allow discounts to be applied on top of that?
We don't have an official decision on that, but I think our gut reaction to that is no, not at this time.
Okay. Thank you. The
It's worth pointing out too, we don't really offer. We try to stay away from discounting.
Okay.
Just with our dynamic pricing model, we tend to go heavy into that and stay away from discounting in general. So that doesn't play a huge role for us as is.
Got it. One of the other things that had come up was, is anyone thinking, or does anybody have an opinion on leveraging a late day discount pricing? So maybe guests that are arriving in the very last hour of the park operation, and normally it's a 2-hour park, experience. Is there any thoughts on discounting for that person that just kind of shows up at the last minute?
We are not looking to do that.
No? Okay.
No, we are not. And part of that is because we want the park to clear out towards the end of the day. So that way our teams can start cleaning and getting things ready and flipped the next day. And staffing is very much up in the air right now. We may have to rely on just a number of full-time employees to begin with. And if that is the case, then we're going to be tight and we're going to be pulling people from other areas. So the stress that puts on the staff having to go the entire day on the front lines while also having our other jobs. I mean, like me, I might be out scanning tickets or scanning passes. So if that's the case, I still have my regular job to do. So that puts a lot of stress on the day. So we don't want to flood the end of the day with visitors.
Right. And that's the exact same way that we're operating too. It's just full-time staff. Also, we cut off our ticket sales at 4 o'clock. We close the zoo at 6. That just gives the time to get everyone out, and everyone can still have that experience.
Matthew, this brings up an interesting point that we had some discussion on, and it's not necessarily something that would work for everyone, but there could be some opportunities to even break your day up. And maybe even think about turning the park twice. What David and his team are doing is really interesting because it's that one-way experience. It's about 2 hours. So every 2 hours, you have another group kind of phasing in. So in a way, it's similar, but there could be opportunities for some attractions and experiences to even break their day apart, right? So you'd have the morning ticket and the afternoon ticket. Not that they're discounted necessarily, because you're still getting a great experience. If you think about it from a ride per cap perspective, you could fit, a typical full day of a ride per cap maybe into that 6-hour time block. That would, because of the restricted capacity and the reduced crowding. So definitely something to maybe consider for certain experiences.
I think that's a really great point because, ultimately, I think we're going to see most attractions taking baby steps into scaling capacity up. And so kind of, what I'm going to say is not a way of like, let's get there really quickly, but how do we make sure that we're cognizant of this capacity, but also that we're able to operate our attractions in a profitable manner to deliver the mission that we need. So one of the things I think that's important to focus on is how do we make sure that we're getting the capacity in as much as possible. And I think we've talked about this in prior discussions of understanding how long of our guest visit time normally is, and then as you pointed out, Stephen, at the Hogle Zoo about how they're measuring that at 2 hours, kind of moving them through that. The other element I think that's really important when we consider that is that normally the capacity that we might not be maximizing is that earliest hours, right? If our attraction can hold 3,000 people at once, the idea would be is how do we get 3,000 people in there pretty close to the beginning of it, and then how do we keep it fed with that the entire time so that then we've maximized that whole day. And so, Greg, I wanted to maybe toss a question over to you to see what you're seeing on maybe methods to drive that. How do you kind of understand that maybe our first operating hour is the least desirable in some attractions just because it's before I normally want to wake up? But how do you kind of stock the park with folks at that point so that then you're maximizing that inventory?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually think this issue of time-based pricing can be very powerful for just the factors you mentioned. If we look at the typical attendance trend over the course of an average day, and it obviously everyone's got a slightly different pattern, but it's pretty common to see that maybe the first couple hours of the day are fairly light. You've got a whole significant portion of the daily attendance. Folks want to show up generally between 11 and 1 in the afternoon, and then it generally starts to ease off and almost gets down to very low levels for that last hour of the day. And the quality of the experience is every bit as good throughout, but the demand for that experience varies quite significantly. And so we think a system where if you've already gone to the level of dividing your day into discrete time periods and having your guests choose, it makes absolute sense in our mind to have a slightly lower price on those shoulder periods where there's less natural demand, because there is a segment of consumer in most cases who would be willing to come during a less busy time, even if it's less convenient for them, to save some money. And in that middle part of the day, where most people see a lot of their traffic come in, that's where you're most likely to have the excess demand over supply. And that's an area where you can capture a little more revenue generally for those who really do want to or are only able to come during that peak time. So we think there's a lot of opportunity there that to be taken advantage of. And even if it's not part of sort of a formal system, we'd encourage folks, if you've got time-based ticketing, do some experiments. Just shift your prices a couple dollars and see what happens and see what reactions you get. And my bet would be that you'll see some pretty good results, both from a revenue standpoint, really capturing the value of those peak periods, but also helping smooth the attendance curve over the course of the day.
One thing that we have done is on Tuesdays from 8 to 10, we set aside a time for high-risk individuals. So that's also something that was required by the county. So you may have to actually do some of these things depending on your state. But our first Tuesday went pretty good. So
and David, if your normal day is, I think you mentioned that your normal time slots are about 200. Is that right?
Correct.
So during those high-risk individual time slots, are you reducing that to a smaller number?
It's the same number.
Okay, got it. And I guess obviously we have a variety of folks on the call, and so I think that there's some amount of folks that have that ability to do maybe time and date specifically priced tickets. But Stephen, maybe I'd toss a question your way. For those that don't have that ability, but maybe need to ensure that they're maximizing their initial operating hours, are there other ideas of ways that you would try to drive that, maybe without just price?
Yeah, so I think what Scott talked about, leveraging all of your assets, right? So you've got more than just your experience. I think there's additional kind of value add components that you could use during certain periods of the day to draw people in. Certainly product stratification is an option, right? We have seen some of our clients where there's a need for an early bird ticket, right? So having that product stratification that's not necessarily timed, but discounted you enter in before a specific time. But using all of those kind of assets you have, we were talking about the food and beverage piece, right? So box lunches, a little bit of just, picnic at the zoo, right? So you come on Tuesday through Thursday and you get a box lunch for the family, enjoy a picnic, right? So there are different kind of assets that you can include. Families that get in before 10 o'clock get a free face mask, right? Those kind of things where you have some of those other value adds that you can leverage without having to necessarily change your structural ticket price, but using those to your advantage to try to draw in behavior into periods where you feel like you really need it.
And do you think that the ability to kind of maybe have guaranteed or exclusive time in those early hours might be like a good entitlement for maybe that pass holder group or any specific groups to try to fill that time?
Yeah, so if it is the instance that you're in the morning, you're struggling a little bit, right? And it does feel like, okay, we want to push up in this time. Maybe it is where you try to incent pass holders to come earlier. I do think it's really about incentives, and it's a little different because everybody's a little bit of a different animal, right? So, but broadly speaking, I do think it's about leveraging the other assets that you have to try to incentivize visits in other periods. Whether that's through pass holder appreciation time periods, whether that's through value add products and bundling, right, that you offer up those additional value adds beyond the price of a ticket. Or maybe we talked a lot about this kind of altruistic sense that a lot of consumers have right now. So maybe it's, if you come and buy a ticket before 10 a.m., then we're going to give $5 of that ticket to a COVID relief fund, right? So there's kind of other avenues where you could leverage some of the consumer behaviors that are in the market right now to try to incentivize them to come in particular periods.
That's great.
Matthew, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
So early entry is actually what we call our 1 hour exclusive time period. It's something that we actually put aside because we, in the past, we've always had issues with parking just because of demand that's there, and we can run out of parking. We have that 9 to 10 a.m. hour during our regular season that's exclusively for members. We've done a number of things to hype that up. Number one, that you get a parking spot for sure. We do a number of specific animal encounters, a giraffe feeding that's early on that they can take advantage of, and the animals are most active earlier in the morning. So I think as we move forward, we're going to have to explore what that looks like, but also giving back to our members and being able to show them appreciation. That's a super easy way of doing that. If you still need to be able to generate that revenue, but also give your dedication to your members. I think setting aside an hour first thing in the morning, maybe when you're not having as much demand, is an easy way to do that because it's just that communication that you're setting that aside for them.
That's great. Thank you, Jared. One of the things that had come up in some of the questions, and we didn't ask the panelists for it, but because we had something towards the end, is we just wanted to kind of demonstrate or show a couple of things in Galaxy as you're thinking about pricing on what you might want to leverage. There were some questions that had come up about how do you do this, how do you do that. One is, just a reminder that there's kind of a simple tool called Item Manager that you can leverage to, make price changes to multiple products all at once. So if you end up saying that, hey, we're going to be going down, $2 or something like that, if that's ultimately where you're guided to go, you can leverage that. Additionally, there is some functionality related to price schedules. And so when Greg and Jared and the team were talking about dynamic pricing, this is kind of in Galaxy how we are able to say, based on this date and time of your visit, this is what the price is going to be that you're going to pay. Obviously, in working with Diginex, there's a little bit of an integration there as well to kind of keep that fed with updated prices. But even if you're not going to leverage dynamic pricing, but you just want to price a little bit differently by the days, just want to kind of make sure you're aware that functionality is there, and it's called price schedules. And then, Randy, thank you. And then what you're probably wondering is, hey, in showing me 2 slides, I have no clue exactly how to take advantage of all of that. So do want to make sure that you're aware that the Learning Portal has a lot of resources for you to help understand these items if you want to leverage them. So specifically the price schedules course, the discounts, or the tickets and items, so that you have the tools to kind of apply maybe some of what you've heard or to get more acquainted with that functionality. In addition to the Learning Portal, there's also the knowledge base that you can leverage to better understand pricing methods, and how you can use those to meet your needs at your attraction. So with that, we're kind of coming right up on our 3:30 end, and we want to be respectful for that. But I want to thank the immense amount of panelists that we had with immense amount of knowledge and expertise. David and Jared, it is amazing to be able to hear direct from attractions on what's going on there in the real world, and we certainly appreciate that. Greg, Scott, and Stephen, your expertise in the world of pricing, I think was easily demonstrated in the comments that you brought, and we're very thankful for you participating in that.
Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure. And for if you want more information about our webinars, we would like to invite you to sign up for our next one. Where, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, we're going to really be focusing on kind of some of the analytics that are coming back when folks are talking to guests and they're thinking about what is visiting an attraction after this mean to you? What's important for you to feel safe and secure and want to actually visit an attraction? So we're going to drill into those details a little bit. And if you are not getting our emails or being kept informed, you can send us an email at marketing@gatewayticketing.com, and we can make sure that you're kept informed. And you can also sign up to be on the distribution list if you prefer by just going to gatewayticketing.com/community. So many thanks for all of you that attended today and everybody that participated on the panel. We're super thankful for you, and we enjoy getting to work together with you to get through this together.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Have a good one, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.